Today's scripture reading will be Acts 8, 1 through 4. And Saul approved of their killing him. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered through Judea and Samaria. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. But Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went.
Good morning, church. It's good to see everybody this morning, and I'm glad that you made the time to be here with us. Those of you that are joining us online, we appreciate that as well. And if you're a guest with us today, we're glad that you've joined us too. It's just nice for us to all be able to be here together. We did not have family reports printed when you came in for service this morning, but we do have some of them available now. I'm going to go ahead and tell you the outline on there is not going to be that particularly helpful today. This may be one of those sermons where I should have just skipped it entirely, but if you want one and you want a place to take notes, then Alex and Jason are going to work their way around. So this will take a little bit longer than it usually does. Be a little gracious if you can, and we'll get you one of those here in just a few minutes. I want to remind everybody before I get going in the message that we have, after our service today, we have a potluck over at the Fox Run Park. On page 3 in the family report and in last week's family report and all kinds of other places, you can find information about that if you'd like to join us. Those of you that are our guests today, we sincerely would love for you to join us too. I know that you may be traveling, you may have other stuff, maybe you got a train ticket up to Pikes Peak this afternoon or something, but if you're free, we'd love for you to join us for the potluck and just let us feed you and hopefully be a blessing to you today. So if you need information about that, you can ask me or you can ask Rob Phipps. Rob, can you raise your hand real quick? There he is. Okay. And we'll help you out with that. We want everybody to be able to come and spend some time together as a church family. So it's a cool opportunity for us, and wanted to make sure you are aware of that happening. All right, we're going to make a few more copies and see if we can get them spread around. Sorry about that, everybody. All right, let me ask you this morning as we're getting started, if you know the story of your family, like the ancestral story of your family. Now, some of you are like, yes, I'm that geek who has done all the research. I've done the 23andMe, the Ancestry.com. I've got all of that stuff going back to the Middle Ages. Yes, that's me. And the rest of you are like, I don't even know all of my great-grandparents' names. And I'm more in that camp. Okay, I'm more in the second of those two groups there. I don't really know a whole lot about my family story as far as, as far back as, a couple of 100 years or something like that. I like the stories that I'm slowly finding out through my aunts and uncles and my grandfather who's still living. But I don't know a whole lot of the story of the Langford family. But here's the thing about it. For a lot of us, there is some clue to your ancestral story in your name, whether you realize it or not. A lot of us have some at least little clue about who our people were built into our name. So, for instance, this one I do know. My last name is Langford. Langford started off spelled Langford. There was a whole big family feud that had to change the name, and that's true. But anyway, the Langford, the Langfords, originated from somewhere in North England, where it was pronounced Longford, where there was a long ford in a river somewhere, and our people were just named because they lived near that place. Someday, maybe I'll find out exactly where that was, and I'll go visit it. I don't know. But that's just a little clue to my ancestral namesake. I looked up some of your names as well, because this is just kind of fun stuff to know. Bormann, the last name Bormann, came from a couple of German words that when they're put together, they roughly mean born near a well. So there you go. Some little bitty clue to your ancestral family. Palermo, Gene and Molly are not here today, but the last name Palermo was a small port city in Italy hundreds of years ago. And so Gene's people, as Texan as he is, probably have an Italian heritage somewhere, okay? And then a lot of others among us, your names go back to an ancestral occupation or a place or even like a physical characteristic like red hair or something like that. There's all sorts of things like that that can contribute to the name. My favorite one of these, though, was one of our elders in the church in Kentucky where I preached before we moved out here. His last name was Broderson. And so I looked up Brother Broderson's name and the reason for it. And it turns out it comes from the German word for nephew, which is brother son. And I just pictured, like Jim, our elder there was the most quiet and like just gentle man. But I just picture somewhere back in his ancestry, this big burly German guy walking up to his nephew, who he's really proud of, putting his arm around him and saying, "This is my brother's son," you know, like, and it stuck. And that's the family name from then on. Now, all of those are just glimpses of your story, right? They're just little bitty moments where you can see a little bit into the past about your story. Maybe for some of us, those are enough of a non-answer that we want to learn more our story, right? We want to go back and find out a little bit more about them and about the kind of people that our people were. Now, it's totally up to you whether you want to go and do that or not. But here's the interesting thing that I want you to think about today. What if in doing that, you found out that your people were part of something different and altogether more wonderful than you ever realized? What if it turned out that your people were connected in some way to world-shaping events, something massively important that had just been forgotten over the generation? And suddenly you put the clues together and you learn about it. Would you want to go back to that? Would you want to reconnect with that massively important effort and thing and bring it into the way that you live your life today? Maybe, maybe not. But can I tell you that as God's people, as the family of Jesus Christ, I really think that's an important thing about us that we sometimes lose sight of, that we forget our ancestral heritage, that we forget sometimes the story that has made us who we are, that we are and always have been a people who don't settle. So what I want to do today is a little bit different take than a sermon. I don't want to do so much teaching all the way through as I want to start by telling you our story. I want to tell you our story in a way that I hope is meaningful to you, that has a deep impact on your heart and on your thinking about being a Christian and all that that means. And then I'll circle back around and make some observations about that story nearer toward the end. But let me just start with a little bit of reminder about the grand narrative of who we are. The story starts with a people called the Israelites, and it starts a long time ago on the other side of the world. They came out of a place called Babylon, and they came out of a place near there, specifically a place called Ur of the Chaldees, because one man who had the decency to listen to God followed what God said. He had the faith to do whatever God told him to do. And so God told him to leave his home and to go into a brand new land, a place where the people didn't speak the same language, where they didn't worship his God, and where he and his family had never been before. But God called him and he sent him on a voyage there. And God said to him, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to a land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." And so our story, our ancestral grand narrative, begins with just him, Abraham, and a few family members, the first ones who are willing to go when God said, "Go." And at first, when they were getting started, they were nobodies. No one knew who they were. In fact, in the next few generations, they didn't have a place to settle. They were nomads. They were constantly on the move, going wherever God directed them to go. They followed the patriarchs of the family. And so Abraham had a son named Isaac, and they followed Isaac. And then Isaac had a son named Jacob, and they ended up following Jacob. They followed the patriarchs of the family. They were very religious. These were our people. They were very religious. I didn't say they were always righteous. They were often very superstitious, but they were always very religious. And occasionally they would camp for a few years near another group that was friendly to them, but that didn't always work out. So then they had to move again, and they followed the patriarch again. Wherever he led, they went, until finally they found somewhere that they were welcomed among another thriving, well-established people group. That place was Egypt. And one of the family members, a man named Joseph, went through a great ordeal, but ended up practically running the country of Egypt and making a home for his family. And as a result, our ancestral people, they settled down, they stayed, and they prospered for a little while. That is until that well-established nation got nervous about that little nomadic people group living over there. And they got nervous that they might become a bigger problem than they already are. And they decided, you know what, let's just exterminate them. Let's squeeze them in until they just die out. And so they were slaves to Egypt for a long, long time. But our people kept growing. Our story is of a people whom God never forgot about. And so he blessed them, and they grew, and he sent someone to lead them out of Egypt, out of a settled lifestyle, into the only thing, into a life rather that none of them had ever known. At least not that generation. They hadn't known what it was like to be on the move. But God said, go, and they went. And they left like their ancestor Abraham, called by God to go. At this time they were more of a presence than they were before. And so they left Egypt basically reduced to an ash heap. And they left as a prospering people group. Now, the narrative ebbs and flows a lot from that point going forward, but ultimately it leads us to a place where by the power of God, they were able to walk into a new land and overthrow the unrighteous peoples that lived there. They brought the blessings of God into that land on a scale that that land had never seen before. They brought a new language. They brought a new way of life. They brought a new way of relationships between different people groups. And they brought a new religion that was better for everyone. So that in everything, what they led to was a place that was more peaceful and that was growing things and where there was more life. Were they perfect? No, but it was a drastic improvement over what was there before. And so they continued to spread throughout the land like the spread of a good influence that can happen among people groups. And you look at that story during Joshua's time and you think, this is going so well, it better keep going like this. But then the story of our people takes a dramatic turn, a terrible turn. Because where the people had been willing to go when God said go, and to do what God said to do, now they have traded in their honor as a people who are on the move and who are unwilling to settle. And they've moved into a land where there's houses they didn't build, vineyards they didn't plant, and infrastructure they didn't create. And they've settled. And they've settled in a very unhealthy kind of way. Because not only have they settled like socially, where they've just gotten comfortable with their neighbors, but they've settled spiritually too. And they're getting more and more comfortable and more connected, in fact, with their neighbors who worship other gods. And they're losing their distinct identity as God's people. They've gotten indulgent, fat, and lazy. And it's just a downward spiral from there. Once they neglect to fully conquer the land that they're living in, generation after generation will pass, and they will face the same problems each generation. They should have been advancing God's ways into the territory of the other people groups, but instead, the thoughts from those people groups are influencing them, and it's all just going in the opposite direction. The great conquering, moving nation, the voyagers who went where they were called to go, now they're spoiled and arrogant and too fearful to continue their progress over the face of the earth. They're too fearful to continue what God has called them to do. Now, whether they were complacent because they were spoiled by abundance, or they were crippled by fear of failure, or they were just so arrogant that they thought, I deserve to be able to sit and enjoy this. The point is, our people, got complacent. And they continued that way for a long time. They sat complacent and got worse and worse and worse, until finally sin had grown among them like gangrene, And it had taken over their lives, their families, their politics, their social practices, their economy, their foreign relations, and everything. Everything was diseased, and it all fell apart. And why? Because they got complacent. Because they settled when they should have been voyaging forth with the advancement of God's good things in this world. And so they suffered, and the whole world suffered for it. Now that's the story of our people, but that's not where it ends. That's where the Old Testament basically leaves the story of our people. But it's not where it ends. Because after they sat complacent for about 1,000 years, a man came who truly led them out of that. And for those who were willing to listen to him, he gave them purpose like they'd never had before. His name was also Joshua, but you know him better as Jesus. And he led a group of people out of the captivity of their sin and gave them freedom to go out and conquer the world again in a whole new kind of way. He showed them by his own life how he intended to accomplish this. First, by taking the message of God's call for his people out to everybody so that it would change, second step, the hearts of people. Not just that they would be forced under a national law, but their hearts would be given to God. And did people respond to his leadership and to his call? Yes. Not all of them, and I know that, but some of them did. The faithful ones, and again, don't forget, this is the grand narrative of our family history. The faithful ones got to work taking the good news of this man's ways all over the world. In fact, they followed his example so closely in their efforts that people started calling them by his name. First at a place called Antioch, and then after that over the entire known world. They started calling them by his name because they were so powerful in their advancement of his ideals, in their advancement of what it meant to believe in him and serve him and be his disciples. They were constantly living like their nomadic ancestors had done. They were on the move, going all different places across the map, bringing the good news of this Jesus. And so in the passage that Tyler read just a minute ago, they were scattered and they went everywhere preaching the word. They were voyagers, a powerful people group whose lives were filled with risk and adventure and pain and struggle and hope and joy. And all of it because they remembered who they were because of who he is, who he was to them. He had given them freedom to conquer this world with his word, and they were determined not to waste what he had given them. And for centuries after that, those who followed him continued to do the same thing. They went into new places where they were hated and repudiated and rejected, and they did it anyway because of who they were, because of who we are. Some of them were thrown into arenas with no weapons to be killed and eaten by lions. Why? Because they were conquerors taking the life-giving ways of Christ into the world. Some of them were slaughtered publicly and painfully while being reviled in the most dehumanizing kind of ways. Why did they do that? Because they were conquerors taking the life-giving ways of God into the world. Some of them were burned alive, tied to a wooden post and set on fire for an agonizing, terrifying death. Why? Because they were conquerors, taking the life-giving ways of God into the world. What did they do that merited all of this hatred and all the vitriol that was spewed at them? They opposed kings who were out of step with God's ways. They led families who were so against the grain of the norm that people couldn't stand them as neighbors. They translated the Bible so that it was accessible to as many people as would be willing to hear and accept the truth. And they died for those things. They died for those because that's who they were. The true ones among them. the true ones who followed their God all through the history of our people. They were sometimes afraid, but they were never daunted by the possibility of what lands and what peoples and what hearts lay ahead of them, unconquered by the glory of God. They did all that they did by the power of God at work within them. And it was more than they could ever ask or even imagine that he would do through them. They did it all because they were able to remember who they were. That is, until another wave of complacency set in. And it didn't happen all at once, and it didn't happen in every place and every time, all at the same time, but it did happen. Christians, like their Israelite forebears, began to be afraid. Christians began to get rich, and so they got spiritually indulgent, fat, and lazy. And they, possibly we, lost sight of who we are. When we had opportunities to march out and be a blessing like our father Abraham was before us, we stayed home. When we had opportunities to get involved and let the gospel infiltrate the cultures where it was most needed, we said, I don't think that's going to work, and so we didn't try. When we had opportunities to go into our own communities and be a blessing from God to the people closest to us, we hid ourselves in secret meetings and talked about the awfulness of that world outside, but did practically nothing to actually let God's will be a conquering power of change in those places. We forgot who we are. We forgot the true beliefs of our people. We forgot the God of our people. Brothers and sisters, the question I have to ask is, are we still them? Are we them in the ways that are good, that we should celebrate and thank God for? Or are we them in the ways that we should be warned about, that we have become complacent, where we were meant to carry on a legacy of being a conquering people, an advancing army, marching with banners flying for the Lord into the conflict with the world? We decided to build a war camp and just stay in it and hope that that army didn't advance on us. What if we have become the ones who are too scared to go when God says go? What if we are the ones who've become contented that the gospel is meant to be enjoyed where it's safe and, most importantly, comfortable? What if we have forgotten the story that makes us who we are? That whole story of the Israelites and the Christians is the story of us, the true story of our people. They are our tribe, our nation. Those who worshiped and walked with him by faith, they are our people. And it's like we started off at the beginning of this message. You can see glimpses of who we were if you're looking for them. This concept of a conquering, advancing army, this is who we are, brothers and sisters. And it's who we are in the sense that you can tell from our history, this is who we're supposed to be, that we're supposed to be a people on the move, a people who don't settle. And we dare not lose this element, this connection to this element of our identity. Now, Sean Cartaya talked about this in a great talk that he gave several months ago here on a Wednesday night. If you weren't here and you don't know what I'm talking about, you should go look it up on our website and just see if you can find it. But he talked about how when they lived in Las Vegas before they moved here, there were Canada geese that you would find on golf courses in public parks in the 115-degree summer heat of Las Vegas. Canada geese aren't supposed to be in the desert in the middle of the summer. They're supposed to be far up north in northern Canada. So what gives? What's the deal? Well, the problem was that in the 80s, the geese had almost gone extinct. And so there was a whole generation of them that were bred in captivity to reintroduce the population, but they'd never seen an ancestral home up in northern Canada. They didn't know their own story, and they had no migratory instincts at all. And Sean gave us that several months ago as a warning to make sure that we understand this is who we are. We don't want to change that identity about ourselves. We don't want to be a people who are bred, our spirits, our souls are bred in the captivity of a church house and have never seen anything beyond its confines. We want to be people who are like our faithful ancestors, that we will go where God says go. And if what he says then is to go and teach those around us, that's what we'll do. By the way, he did say that. It's exactly what he said. This is why the grand narrative of God's people matters so much, because it reminds us that we are a people who don't settle, who don't get complacent and stop ourselves from going where we should go for the glory of God. This truth, by the way, is infused in the songs that we sing, that we are a people empowered by God to continue to go. One of the great hymns of the Christian faith is Martin Luther's hymn, A Mighty Fortress. You know this hymn? It's hard to sing in church. The harmony parts are difficult, but the words are magnificent. This is the English translation. Did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. We're not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. Do you ask who that may be? Christ Jesus. It is he. Lord Sabaoth, his name, from age to age the same, and he must win the battle. Another verse. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God hath willed his truth to triumph through us. It's so good, because it's such a powerful concept that Jesus himself said the gates of hell will not prevail against his people. And if we believe that, then we know we have the power to still be a conquering people. The best of our songs will remind us that we are not meant to get complacent and sit lazily in our church pew until the judgment day. God is a mighty fortress, a strong advancing force, and he will win the battle. We need to fight on his side. And this concept of an advancing, conquering people, it's not just infused into the words as though you kind of have to read below the surface in the New Testament. This is blatant in the words of Jesus. When he said in Matthew 28, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So what's your job? Your job is go therefore and make disciples of all the nations. It's not as though he told us that and was unwilling to do it. He said, we're told in another place in the New Testament to look to him as the author and the perfecter of the faith that we're called to embody. We are called to go and make disciples of all the nations. Listen, Barry and I didn't work this out ahead of time, but he's saying send the light right before the sermon. We've heard the call from Macedonia, like Paul, right? Paul had that vision of a man of Macedonia saying, come over to this area and help us. We need to know the truth about Jesus. And he took it as a sign from God, and they went and preached, and many people believed in that area. We say in that hymn, we have heard the same Macedonian call that there is a whole world full of people who need the help of the gospel. And we will go. Because the light is being sent, and this is who we are. I love these words from Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 12. When whoever wrote that letter said to the Christians that were first reading it, therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet and go. Go teach. Go teach the people about this God. Listen, brothers and sisters, our identity is that we are not a people of sitters. We are a people of builders, of explorers, a people who are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Romans 8 and verse 37. It means that we are not called to be a complacent class of Christians doomed to repeat the mistakes of our spiritual ancestors who, number one, got settled, and then number two, did settle for whatever half-hearted devotion to God would get them. We're not claiming to be perfect, but we're striving to be perfect. We want to continue to pursue the excellence of those who went before us, who did serve God faithfully. This is why we cannot forget our ancestral heritage. The grand narrative of our elders on whose shoulders we stand in this faith. Those who went before serving God faithfully to give us an example that we should follow in their footsteps. We're not going to give in to the temptations to compartmentalize the gospel into certain buildings, certain hours, certain friendships, certain conversations, and certain moral choices. Christians for centuries have built walls, circled wagons, and built up the reefs to stop anything else from coming in that might interfere with our prosperous, comfortable complacency. We got to stop. We can't let this happen. We cannot sleep when we're called to be on pilgrimage. We cannot let the fear of lions and giants and closed gates and high winds and strong waves paralyze us and hold us back when we should be out conquering the world with our Savior's good news. We are a people on the move, a people who have a message to share with the world. And we are promised that if we put in the effort at it, we will not fail in it, because He is with us. And so these are the stories of our ancestors, brothers and sisters. And this is what that story means for who we are today. We are, by God's grace and His power, we are the saints of Jesus Christ. As one poet said, we are that strength which in old days moved heaven and earth. And we will continue as voyagers, as evangelists, as pilgrims, as wanderers, yes, but as more than conquerors through Him who has loved us. What is the story of your people? How much of it do you know, and how much of it impacts you today? What if you found out that your family story was one of a people group who had done some truly amazing, world-shaping things, and then somehow that story had been forgotten? If you heard it anew, would you want to participate in it in your own generation? I sure hope so. Someday maybe I'll get to see the place where the Longfords got their name. I'll be honest though, I know enough about their heritage since then, their story since then. It's not like I really want to align myself with who they were and what they did, okay? There's all sorts of murders in Eastern Kentucky that have my name connected to them. It's not good. It's not good. But the story of God's people, of Jesus's family, that's one that I want to align myself with. That's a story that I really want to be part of. I want to be a part of the family who will come from east and west to sit at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is us, brothers and sisters. This is who we are. We must remember this. We must commit ourselves to who we are called to be. And if on a personal level for you, that means that you need to repent of some sin in your life and give your heart wholly to God, today that's your invitation. Because I want to invite you to do that as a response to this message. That if we can pray for you, and if we can be the people that you want to hold yourself accountable to live a life that serves God more fully and more devotedly, then we want to give you an opportunity to come and tell us that. You can talk to one of the elders of this church, one of the shepherds of this flock. That's their role here. You can also talk to me about that if you want to. We're going to be one of each of us up here during this song. So at the very least, you'll know who we are. And if you want to come and find us now, you can do that. If you want to come and find us later, you can do that too. But in any case, we want to help you. We want to help you more fully live out the ideal of who we are, so that together we can all serve God in the way that, at least closer to the way that He deserves to be served and honored. If we can help you with that in some way and you want to make it known publicly, why don't you come forward while we stand and sing this hymn together?